Erich Fromm. Erich Fromm, who lived between 1900 and 1980, was a social psychologist and an innovator of what is now called humanistic psychology. Very prolific author, incredible catalog of works, very accessible, by the way. This was a scholar who wrote for a general audience, and his works are very accessible in contrast to a lot of scholarly works, which are sometimes very difficult to deal with. And as students, you probably know something about this. In his book, To Have or to Be, a text which you will be encountering in this class. I'll be assigning pieces of it as we make our way through the semester. In his book, To Have or to Be, he describes two different modes of existence, the having mode and the being mode. Now, I'm not going to get into detail about those two modes right now, but the short of it is that for him, the having mode is a mode in which one is not fully engaged and participating fully in life. They stand almost outside of life. They are less focused on life itself than on the means by which life is sustained. And he contrasts that kind of alienated outside of life mode of existence with what he calls the being mode. And the being mode is a kind of attentive, creative, active, participatory state of being in the world. Now that may sound a little abstract, more on that later, but that's just to give you a sketch to understand the excerpt that I'm going to share with you here. Fromm wrote in this 1976 work, students in the having mode of existence will listen to a lecture, hearing the words and understanding their logical structure and their meaning, and as best they can, will write down every word in their loose leaf notebooks so that later on they can memorize their notes and thus pass an examination. But the content does not become part of their own individual system of thought, enriching and widening it. Instead, they transform the words they hear into fixed clusters of thought or whole theories which they store up. The students and the content of the lectures remain strangers to each other, except that each student has become the owner of a collection of statements made by somebody else, who had either created them or taken them over from another source. The students do not have to produce or create something new. Now, before I read the next bit, Fromm is saying that many students are not authentically connecting to the ideas that they are supposedly, quote-unquote, learning. Instead, what they're doing is, it's as if they were handed some currency that they'd never seen before, and they didn't even understand the writing on it, or they couldn't even read the numbers were written in such a way that they couldn't even make sense of it. And then they walked up and they saw some kind of a poster, and the poster showed an image of one piece of currency, and it said that this can buy you an apple. And then it showed another picture of a piece of currency, and it said this can buy you a car, and so on. And imagine that person could then go and say, okay, I have one of those pieces of currency that I apparently can exchange for some food, so I'll do that. Now, you could engage in that process with the guidance of that little poster, but you wouldn't really understand the currency. You wouldn't understand the exchange that you just participated in. And Fromm is saying that by and large, students engage in the so-called learning process in much the same way. We're just going through the motions. All right, memorize this exactly. How does that make sense? Or why did you come to that conclusion? Or how do we know this is true? I don't know, but it's going to be on the test, so let me prepare for it. Let me memorize it, at least long enough to get through the exam. And let's be honest, what happens after the exam? Think back on your educational career. Think about how many tests at this point in your life that you've taken. Think about how many notes you've taken or study guides you've completed, and then just ask yourself this simple question. How much of that do you actually know today? How much of it have you retained? How much of it do you recall? Now you know the answer. I know the answer. We all know the answer. Not very much. I mean, if you are sitting there listening to this or standing or whatever it is you're doing, thinking to yourself, no, I remember quite a lot. Well, you know that you are not the standard, right? You know that that's not normal. Most of us have forgotten most of it. Why? Because, as he says here, the students in the content of the lectures or whatever it may be remain strangers to each other. They haven't really fully, meaningfully intermingled. Now he says the process of learning has an entirely different quality for students in the being mode of relatedness to the world. And his whole idea of the being mode is a more fully integrated way of participating, as he says here, of relatedness, or we might say intermingling with the world. He says that students who are learning in the being mode, instead of being passive receptacles of words and ideas, they listen, they hear, and most important, they receive and they respond in an active, productive way. Again, the crucial part here is he's saying it's not just that they listen, it's not just that they hear, it's not just that they receive, but that they do all of this in an active, productive way. What they listen to stimulates their own thinking processes. New questions, new ideas, new perspectives arise in their minds. Their listening is an alive process. So you're sitting there and you're listening to a lecture, and maybe you're just, the teacher's teaching to the test and they're saying, okay, and this is going to be on the test, and you got your study guide, or you kind of zone out until the teacher says, oh, and by the way, this is going to be on the test, and then you wake up, right? You put your phone down or whatever, and you start going, oh, I need to know this, and you start typing it out. That's the having mode, all right? That's the kind of alienated, superficial, look at the poster, how do I transact this information for this result? How do I cash in this idea for this grade of an A or a B or whatever it is? In contrast, Fromm says if we're learning in a meaningful manner, if we're really alive in that process, we are responding in an active manner. We're asking ourselves, that what the professor just mentioned or what I just read, that makes me think of that time that I was watching this movie and, they were dealing with that like kind of similar dilemma. And maybe you even lose focus of the lecture, or you have to stop reading the essay because your own intellectual wheels start turning. And so that you have to pause for a moment and think about it. Now, it may seem in the short term that you are distracted, that you are aloof. I mean, you might even be reprimanded if you're a young enough child in a class. Pay attention, be attentive. But the important point that Fromm is getting at is real learning means paying attention and being attentive to your ideas too. Paying attention to your own experiences, your own beliefs, your own encounters with culture, be it music or film or whatever your grandmother said or something that your dad said on a fishing trip or whatever the case may be, your own set of beliefs and ideas. Meaningful learning occurs when we combine our educational experiences, a lecture, a video, an essay, with our own life and our own experiences, such that we ask ourselves questions, or we feel challenged, or we feel provoked by an idea. Maybe we're upset, maybe we're embarrassed, maybe we're angry, maybe we're defensive, maybe we're inspired. But all of those range of feelings indicate an active participation in the process.